Okay, Sonia and Dr. Zach, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation really around perfectionism. I think perfectionism is something that so many people around the globe deal with. So I'd love to get your take on, what you see as perfectionism, how it's impacted your life, and maybe anything that you'd recommend for the listeners. So let's start with Sonia. Maybe you can kick things off.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining another episode panel of this amazing group, this trio that we're going. Well, let's start. I feel that perfectionism and being a perfectionist is a human quality. I feel like all of us have it to one degree or another. It's sticky when we overdo anything, right? Any quality. So it's all about harmony. It's all about balance. Now, I can say that I've definitely been a perfectionist my whole life. I was just joking and saying I'm a reformed perfectionist, but those threads are still there all the time. And really look deeper into what perfectionism is or what the origin is. It's often there's a tendency that lies in our childhood, right? Because I think so deep and because I do deep rooted work, I underneath what's the layer, what happened in childhood where you were overly controlled, or you may have been punished, right? You may have been punished for being yourself, or you were in a stressful environment where you had a certain way. So those underlying tendencies are still connected with us. They're still, they're still here at some point until we start doing the inner work, until we start peeling the layers. And again, one of the things of why people are often perfectionists is because, they were, like I said, they were not able to be authentic to their true nature. And I also looking at, well, what is it? And I feel of times these qualities become sort of methods, right? They become a way of coping and surviving. And so how can we really release some tendencies to bring in more balance, to bring in more harmony, to bring in just more softness? So I'm all about that softness, finding middle ground. And again, if anyone is struggling, I mean, this is a major, it can be a psychological issue where you go to therapy for it. You have coaches for it. So I feel that if anyone is struggling, really start looking at the underpinnings of your childhood and start looking at where it is that you're judging yourself. I feel that perfectionism and judgment goes hand in hand. So I'll leave it at that.
So amazing and so true. So many things that you said, releasing tendencies, that softness, creating that new space. And it's so powerful when you look at this topic of perfectionism and how it goes hand in hand with judgment. So I'm excited to learn, more of your take. From you, Dr. Zach, what do you think of perfectionism? How has this impacted your life?
Well, I think I don't consider myself a perfectionist. I don't expect to be perfect. I'm not that hard on myself, which is really what it comes down to a lot. It's like what Sonya was talking about, softening. Because really, if you want to be the hardest on yourself, then you're trying to be a perfectionist. I mean, we're all perfect in the way we are, but we don't judge ourselves in that way. In other words, accepting ourselves for who we are, and we're all trying to do the best we can. In the midst of, again, it goes back to what's perfection. If I was having a discussion with my brother, who's very spiritually oriented, like we are, and he judges God. We had this whole thing of, he had an experience where he was in a church and this ray of light came in through the windows of the church, and it just hit his heart, and he just felt this incredible feeling of love, and it just blew him away how powerful that love experience was. And then he looked at that and said, well, if that's God, just totally filled with love, then how could he or she have created this world with such suffering and pain? You know, so he couldn't put it all together. I'm not saying I put it all together, but he said, well, there's got to be something else beside that one God. Because somebody who loves so much could not be creating such struggle and pain. And so it's a question of and how we look at ourselves, that we're complicated. You know, I look at God, a universal spirit, or the source, as, you know, working with this form, and we've evolved. If you're not if you believe in evolution, the mind. I mean, look at the creatures that we came from. You know, this has been an evolution, and we have many parts to our minds and modes of functioning, and also we're in the state of this illusion on top of it all. So so perfection comes in all kinds of shapes and forms, and you know, it's really important to just sort of accept the way things are to a certain degree, and accept yourself the way you are. Not that you're not willing to get better and you shouldn't set goals and move forward in your life and achieve the things that you want to achieve. But in each moment, just be with where you are and just accept it. Make all your plans and everything, but just be with yourself. Just be centered. It goes back to mindfulness. You know, just let's do that. I think that's so important. We always throw in a little bit of meditation here. So let's do a mindful moment. We can do it with your eyes open, you know, which is, everybody should do a few times each day, or any time that you're stressed out, you should just take a couple of breaths. So let's take 5 nice, gentle breaths and feel what's going on inside of you, your sensations, your feelings. So that's always a good place to start, just to be in the moment, feel grounded, and then move forward. And again, going back to what Sonya said, just be gentle with yourself. This is just that, taking the 30 seconds, 25, 30 seconds is a good way to always start. If you get all tense and beating yourself, I got to do better, I'm not good enough. I mean, I always, mama, daddy wanted me to be perfect. I wanted to be perfect for them. And let that go, you know, just so.
I loved that. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Zach.
You're welcome.
Oh, breathing and breath, it helps us realign, I think, so much. For me, when I think about perfectionism, I think about the refusal to accept anything less than perfect. So right away, what is perfect and who defined perfect? For me, immediately, I think of my dad and this constant striving to find my meaning in his love. So if I didn't get his attention, or if I didn't get his love, I felt like I was doing something wrong, like there was something wrong with me. And so it would constantly be my driver, this sense of perfectionism. It'll definitely push you to do extraordinary things, but at what cost, right? So for me, I was filling myself up with all the wrong things as a perfectionist. I'm a recovering perfectionist, where, you know, I was filling myself up with material things, and I thought they were giving me my worth. And I was filling myself up with the opinions of others, and what they thought of me is what I held so dear. And this refusal to accept anything less than perfect, it reminds me of something Sonya said, which it's a punishment. We punish ourselves. It's an abusive type of energy. And I again think, you know, where did we learn this? And there is a place where we learned it, but now in this present moment, we're still deciding to behave that way. We're still consciously choosing it. Sometimes we're unconsciously choosing it, and it's just driving us. It did for me in careers. But you always reach a place of knowing, and this is where I think back to what you were talking about, Dr. Zach, of this gentleness. As a perfectionist, you get too hard, and it's a hardening of the heart. It's like your heart becomes a stone, and you become devoid of emotion. You become very business focused sometimes, hypercritical, and it can create so many disturbances in relationships. Because just imagine that you're bringing this level of perfectionist to even people, and you're having these expectations blindly because it's that hidden judgment. So I found that when I got in touch with my own perfectionist side, it was like a gate. The moment I was able to see it and become aware of, wow, I am leaving this idea of perfectionism to someone else's definition, and I don't want to do that anymore. So when I crossed that gate, I really redefined what I felt was perfect, because then as I put myself out there and as I, had my own failures, even if it was less than perfect, I had a new definition of perfect. So my new definition of perfect involved that gentleness. It still does today, that radical self-responsibility, self-acceptance, and just being able to look in the mirror. And I love where you shared that story, Dr. Zach, of your brother feeling that light. Sometimes I just catch myself in the mirror and I see the old perfectionist in me. And I'm just so grateful that I have such a powerful, faith within me, because now when I see myself, I bring that loving kindness versus that perfectionist attitude. So that's been super transformative for me. For you, Sonya, what else comes up when you think about perfectionism?
I think of, when Dr. Zach was when we were just breathing, and something just came through, and I wrote it down, and it was something about having our needs met. So when we don't have our initial needs met, or if we are, too controlled, not able to be ourselves, where we have these tendencies that are still running the show until we can really go, again, inner child work. How can I help you? Journaling, right? Affirmations, having some sort of an outlet, having a coach. And again, knowing that even you make mistakes. So the thing with perfectionists is that you're overly critical, you're overly judgmental, you're judging yourself, absolutely hardening of the heart, no room for error. But the thing is that once we do realize that even the word mistake, you can do it over again. It was a mistake. And it's okay to do it again. And that other people have also had these challenges and difficulties in whatever they have also done, right? So whether it's starting a business, going back to school, or reinventing ourselves, or, doing something different, being of service, we're going to be these qualities come in over and over again until we can soften, until we can go, well, again, that's why I'm such a huge fan of inner child work, where we can just sit with our heart and go, how can I help you? Like, where are your needs not met still? Where can I just lighten up a little bit and see that this is, like you said, Dr. Zach, all an illusion, and we are really play. So where did we harden so much to a point where now we're not in play and we're just in the masculine, just a doer role, or again, not soft with our own selves. But again, that starts with how we look at the world as well. If we're overly someone else, overly judgmental of the situation, scenario, whatever, is because we're doing that for ourselves. So really looking at where, again, this is a perfect time to do all this shadow mutation, especially with all this down. So again, when these nuggets, write it down and start to do deeper transmutation work. It's all just so ripe for us to do this inner work right now.
Yeah, it's the perfect timing. Now is the best timing. the only timing. So I love that. Thank you so much for that, Sonya. The inner child work is so important. And for you, Dr. Zach, what else comes up around perfectionism?
Well, I was thinking, by the way, I first want to say, Sherry, that, your transformation and what the changes, positive changes you're going through are just so amazing to hear about, so, I'm sure, Sonia, we both congratulate you on, making so many great breakthroughs.
Thank you.
It's really inspiring. When Sonia was talking about the inner child work, I mean, that's where most of our traumas come from. I mean, we have traumas, later in life. But really what separates us from connecting with our higher selves and with God is really a lot of this work, that inner child work that needs to be done. It's amazing. And really, a lot of that work takes place through either therapy or meditation. And there's really, that's the bulk of it. That's really where the bulk of it. So if you have a tendency of going towards therapy, then do that, But that doesn't have to be the only way. And if you're leaning more towards meditation, start doing that. That's that inner work. That's how you talk about that inner child work. Well, that's what meditation is all about. And working with somebody like Sonya, is perfect, because I know that she will guide you also in doing meditation, because that's inner work and inner child work. That's, and I was reading this book on enlightenment. I'm finishing up my book on the practical guide to enlightenment, practical steps to becoming enlightened. And he was talking about the author, this guy Shenzhen Young, Science of Meditation. And he was talking about, and I know Sherry's writing down the title of that book. She is just growing like a weed. It's unbelievable. So what he was talking about was that we live our lives on the surface of our consciousness. And if we want to get down to be at our source, like, be really connected. What do I mean by this? Be fully connected with spirit. You have to go on a journey. And part of that journey is working through, like what Sonya talks about, the inner child work. Those things are just, and he describes, your upper hand is where your consciousness is, and my other hand is where the source is. And you have like this rubber ball between the two hands. And you're trying to put the hands together, so you can connect. And that rubber ball is all that inner work that you need to go through. And, to really be fully self-actualized. And that resistance, it takes work. I mean, you got to work that through. It's not going to just evaporate, and you can't run away from it. Sometimes even like this being a perfectionist is partially this running away. It's almost like say, well, I can't be perfect. Nobody's perfect. So why should I even try? It has a kind of a negative underside to it, like we've been talking about, how harsh we are. And that daddy or mommy just wanted to, I needed to be perfect because maybe one of my siblings was a favorite and I wasn't the favorite. Well, that happened with my father. My older brother was his favorite, even though I knew he loved me, but I had to, excel. So there was a situation, I got to tell you how I dealt with this. So I was a really good baseball player. I pitched and I played third base. And so anyway, I went to summer camp, and then they were putting this little league all-star team together. And I had been known as being this big home run hitter. So the coach wanted me on the team. So they pulled me out of my summer camp, which was, a couple of 100 miles away. And I came back for a few weeks to practice and get ready. So here we had a home game. We won the first game. And the I played first base. That's another whole other story. But then the home game, there was like 4,000 people in this small town in Westchester. And my father and mother were there. And my father rarely ever saw me play ball because he was an eye doctor and he worked on Saturdays, and that's when our games were on Saturdays. So here I'm all excited. My father's gonna watch me. And what does the coach do? He puts me in right field because I was the third pitcher. If the first two starting pitchers ran into the problem, I was the relief pitcher, And then the star player of the team, he was first baseman, so he was not pitching, so he played first. So where'd they put me? In right field. I had never played in the outfield in my life. Okay? So there's 4,000 people. A fly ball comes out to me, and it comes straight at me, which is so hard. I mean, it wasn't at an angle where I could see the course of the ball. Just came, so it just rises in the air and drops. And you have no idea, unless you have a lot of experience, of where that ball, do you have to run in, do you stay still, or you go back? I had no idea. The first instinct, as I've read about it, I ran in. That's your first instinct. If the ball's coming out on an angle, low down. And ball went right over my head. And 2 runs scored. And I'm not sure if we lost the game because of that. I think the other team was really hitting our pitcher pretty bad. But it was the most embarrassing moment of my life. And here I was trying to be perfect for my father, show him what he was missing, by not seeing my games. And here I am, like most embarrassing person, dragging myself off the field. And you know how I dealt with that? And that's been bugging me all my life. And so finally, there's an exercise program that I have in my meditation program, which is to deal with this internal representation. It's the space. I think we talked about that, I think in one of the previous sessions, where you have a choice. There's a stimulus, which is a thought of that moment. And then the response, of course, is feeling terrible and embarrassed. So what I did was I changed scenario in my mind. Now people are going to think, well, that's not real. Well, a lot of things that we have in our head are not real, okay? So I took that moment and said, I caught that ball instead of dropping it or missing it. And I threw out the runner running from second to third, and I threw him out in third base. And I ended up being a star of that game. We won that game. And that's what I changed. So now that circumstance is no longer haunting me. So the point I want to make is that we have there's a lot of motivation to do our inner work, tremendous amount, not only spiritually, but also emotionally and the way we create our lives. And so there are things out there. So for people who are listening to this, I hope you take some of our advice and do work, because you can change the quality of your life incredibly. So anyway.
I loved that story. And it was so interesting because I could see you out there. And then I loved how you changed the scenario. And it's so powerful because so many people have stored memories and painful memories that they flash back to all the time and are reignited with that pain, panic disorder, and all sorts of things like that. So it's fascinating. And I love where you talked about how it was haunting you. That reminds me of what this sense of perfectionism done. It haunts us because there's perfection doesn't exist. And to me, when I think about how I've really worked through this, a lot of it came with understanding, where do I come from? Because when I talked about my father, he was a humongous influence in my life. And so much of my life was influenced by my parents. But I got to a point in my own self-development where I thought one step above. And I was like, well, what about our Heavenly Father? And what about their parents and their parents and their parents and what they experienced? And I was overwhelmed with compassion. And again, it was when you cross the gate, all you see is this sense of compassion. And it really took me developing a strong relationship with God. So I tell people, who is God to you? Who is God to you? Is he your parent? Is he your spouse? Is he your friend? Is he or she your your enemy? Is here, like, who is God to you? And to me, God has become my oxygen, because in this sense of illusion, when I focus so much on what I think I need to do to get ahead in this world, I suffocate. But if I'm shifted and I keep my focus on God, and I remember, well, I came from God, I'm already perfect. There's nothing I have to do. I could sit here and eat cheese doodles, and I am still just as worthy as I was a minute ago. And in that moment, I also have so much empathy and just love for my parents. And when we talk about our childhood, this is where, when so many people look back and they're like, oh, they're so angry. Why did this happen to me? But again, when you shift that focus and you start to realize that even our abusers have had their own parents, and maybe that relationship that they have with their parents wasn't cultivated that well. And so when is it going to stop? It stops with us. We have the control. Now we get to decide what is perfect mean to us, what is acceptable, and where do we come from. So for me, when I started to shift and I said, you know what, God's going to be my oxygen. And when I think that I'm not doing enough, I'm just going to go to God and say, God, am I enough? And in that moment, I say, am I breathing? Okay. If I'm breathing, then I'm enough. I have spirit in me. So how am I not enough? I've been blessed. I've been born. So for anyone that's sitting there thinking like, well, there's not really a lot good about me, or I am all of these failures that I have done, then it's really, asking yourself, well, who do you think made you? Like, and do you think that that person forgot about you, when they were creating just you? Only you is the one. Because these are the thoughts that I had. I thought there was something legitimately wrong with me. And it was from this sense of perfectionism. So to anyone that might be dealing with these thoughts where they feel like they're not enough, nothing they do is enough. When they look in the mirror, they feel these self-attacking thoughts. Ask yourself, where am I coming from? And if that space that you're coming from is fear, it's like what we talk about. It doesn't exist. It's going to suffocate you. If you can shift and remember that you come from love, that just even being born is a miraculous event, and that is us, that we are actually walking around and we're divinely supported, then I realize, wow, like this is something to be grateful for, not to abuse myself over. Even the smallest wins take on a whole new meaning. Waking up becomes a success. Breathing becomes a success. And like what you talked about, Dr. Zach, meditation and therapy. Meditation is where we get to rebuild that relationship with our God, right? Like you rebuild that relationship with that parent. You rebuild that relationship with that friend. Maybe that parent is you becoming a better parent to yourself because your parents couldn't show up. Or maybe it's you being that friend and helping you meet all of these failures with a sense of friendliness, right? So that to me has been so transformative around this topic. And for you, Sonya, we'll do one more round. What comes up for you with perfectionism?
The nail on so many spots. And I think even to go back to Dr. Zach's story when he was talking about the failure, I think that failure stagnates us on so many levels, but that failure and the failure or the perfectionism tendencies really is lies in our imagination, right? It's what could have been, what should have been, what can I do? And I feel that the root of it is in self-criticism, and where can we really soften? So that's something that I just keep coming back to. It's a lot of, forgiveness processes. We look at forgiveness for others, but one of the things that I love to do on a frequent basis, it's a 7-day process, morning and night, and where you go into forgiving yourself for having all of these thoughts, for having all of these cords attached in different places, fragments that are running around with of all these illusions and distortions that your mind has created, right? So really softening back, giving yourself for having these judgments towards yourself. And I really feel that, like you said with the creator, it's that we are here for a reason, and perfectionism could very well be one of the biggest things that we're working on in this lifetime. How to really cultivate that relationship with your creator. And and once you really work on it and overcome it yourself, and it's not that you're ever gonna, split 100, we're still human. There's different qualities, like you competitive, or you get jealous, or you are hard on yourself. It's all about just know and really look at the underlying feeling. There's a modality that I've tried and I've used. It's called EFT tapping, which is really helpful. So you go to the emotion and you can do it for yourself. You can learn it. And one of the things that I did early on when I had my awakening is there's a man who specializes in what's called EFT tapping with matrix re-imprinting. So it's basically re-imprinting the matrix of where the scenario that had taken place, and you're basically you're reorganizing it in a positive manner and re-imprinting it to where you change the scenario. And I can't tell you how beneficial that was for me. There was like one of the biggest core woundings that had to do with my dad being really hard on myself, and I saw it. I was sick, I wasn't feeling well, and he was, I was going on. That was imprinted in my mind, where I felt like, he didn't care. So we went ahead and reorganized it in your own nervous system, in your brain, and it takes a few minutes, but I don't have the charge that I did. And that's sometimes all that it takes. It's these fascinating, quick and easy modalities that are so life-shifting often. And and again, you don't have to be in years of therapy. Even if you can have one session and re-imprint that program in your head to, again, have compassion. This is one of the reasons why I do ancestral work, because again, in our lineage, it's passed down and down and down until it comes to us. And we are, like you said, the change makers. We have said on some soul level, it stops with us. It stops here. I've said this so many times, with everything. And so I really feel that there's such beautiful modalities. And again, it's all about awareness. And again, not to beat ourselves up for having these qualities. I think that's really important, because again, we go back into the loop of judgment. We really go back into beating ourselves up for having this initial thought anyway, that we don't realize what the roots were. The roots were all of what I had mentioned, neglect, being overly controlled, having perfection tendencies coming from our parents, their parents. And then getting out of the survival mode, which is something I'm really working on, with different modalities. And ultimately, like you said, compassion. Compassion is king. And again, meditation, really coming back to center with our creator, and softening our heart, really doing breath work. Just really coming back into our heart over and over again. As soon as we realize that we're having those tendencies again, even as quick as doing a couple minutes of mirror work. So all of that stuff is so, so important and beneficial.
So powerful, so much. I was writing down the EFT tapping and whatnot. So beautiful. I'm excited to explore these different modalities and techniques. And for anyone that's listening, you can obviously reach out to Sonya. She's got so many different techniques that can help you wherever you are on your path. And for you, Dr. Zach, what comes up for perfectionism? I think you're on mute, Dr. Zach.
There we go. Because I heard an ambulance go by before. So what I was thinking about was what Sonya was focusing on at the end of her talk, was about compassion. That perfectionism we've been talking about through this broadcast is when you're hard on yourself. You're just not You're not being gentle, you're not being soft, and you're not coming from love for yourself. You know, again, it comes back to how much do you really love yourself? You know, if you don't love yourself much because you don't think your parents loved you much, you know, and you're reflecting that, then you're not going to be that compassionate about yourself, because compassion is really like love in action. That's really, I love that definition of compassion. So if you're minimizing or, you know, struggling to love yourself, then, you know, that love, which described before, is like project a light bulb. You know, how brightly is it glowing inside of you? And that's what you project out, not only to other people, but to yourself. And a lot of these, you know, loving kindness meditations, you start with yourself. And a lot of people say, wait a second, that's just being consumed myself, that's just being narcissistic. No, I mean, yeah, there can be some of that, but there's a most important, essential truth that you need to really love yourself if you're going to be able to love other people. And what is really also important, and we always have to keep talking about it, because people have to be always conscious of it, especially if they're not meditating, or even if they are meditating, to meditate on this. So we talk about, again, this illusion, and the overriding illusion that humankind we're born into, and what we're facing, and why so many miserable things happen in this world, is because people are living, and our race and our species is living in the midst of an illusion. We're in like the wrong clothing. We're like put on a set of clothing that's based on fear, that's not connected to spirit, you know, that feels we're just separate from everybody else, and we got to watch out for ourselves and be scared and fearful of everybody. And that's not who we really are. We got to take off that clothes, and what's underneath that is love, deep compassion, and connection with the spirit. So we got a lot of work to do, you know, as a species, to get ourselves out of this situation we're in. And meditation is one of the best proven ways to make that transition. Because what ends up happening is this clothing, this ego clothing, that it sort of wrapped us up like this. And as we try to take it off and it snaps back, you know, boom, just like a vice. And we go, oh yeah, I got it. I can get it now. And I'm, you know, doing my meditation. And then you wake up from the meditation and boom, you know, back it wraps you up again. So there's a lot of work that's involved, because we're working against a negative force that's trying to keep us from being connected to our true selves, and which is, you know, the universal spirit or God. So it takes work. That's why meditation, they talk about it being a practice. It's like learning to play an instrument. So you got to play it, learn to play this illusion and be able to dispel it. And so take meditation incredibly seriously if you want to transform your life. And then in addition to that, do all the things that we've been talking about to help supplement that process. It's a multifaceted approach that's key.
I love that. So powerful, everything you just mentioned. And so many things came up for me too. As you talked about the illusion, I think right away of this sense of perfectionism that stems from the body consciousness, and how people think they are their five senses, and that's it. Like, I am these five senses. But for those that are on a spiritual path, they know there's so much more. We're multisensory. And what I've discovered on my path is that when we shift back into this body consciousness, all of a sudden it's me versus you. You're over there, and I'm over here, and I'm separate than you because my body's cut off by these fingers. And we neglect the soul within us. We forget that we're the spiritual being packaged in this body, and that all of us are connected. And we have moments of it where we feel that connection, and sometimes we don't even speak. I think people experience telepathy and they don't even realize it sometimes. We have this sense of deja vu sometimes, and they're like, what is that? Well, it's constantly pushing us to have this inner conversation with our spirit and our soul and get in touch with that. And when I think about what the body does is it has all these expectations. And this is where perfection is stemming from: expectations, judgment. And when I think about God, and when I think about what is God saying about me today, God saying, Sherry, I woke you up. I woke you up. What are you talking? What do you mean you have to do anything? I woke you up today. And for someone that lives in this state of perfectionism and thinks that they are their body, waking up is not an expectation that they really care about. They forget about it, right? And when you think about that on the deepest level, this is what depression does. It's like the devil sits next to you and says, you woke up, that's a bad thing. And that's why I think mental health, and when we talk about meditation and we talk about cultivating and fostering a relationship with a higher power, it is a necessity. We don't learn this in school, right? We don't learn this growing up. How do you grow spiritually and mentally and emotionally and physically? Right? We see aerobics teachers that are group fitness instructors, but where are the spiritual aerobics instructors, right? Like, where are those people that are showing us how to lift up hard things and push our faith? And when it gets to this sense of perfectionism, it's really up to us to discover our own spiritual essence. It's up to us to discover that voice. It's up to us to start meditating, right? Like Dr. Zach was talking about, we might know to do all these things, but we don't actually do them. And that's because I think we're not tuning in. We're still living in this state of body consciousness. And some of us are totally fine with that. And we're like, I'm happy with the way I look. I'm happy with what I got. I don't want to grow. I don't want to look at anything. I don't want to, expand or any of that. And that's okay. Right. But for those of you that are watching this video, I want you to remember that God woke you up today. And that if you can wake up and have only one expectation, and that is to just be the best that you can be, to just be yourself, where we talked about expressing yourself, to do that. And when you're scared of the judgment of other people, go back to God and say, God, well, what do you think of me? None of them like me. God's going to come back and say, I woke you up. I woke you up. And so that has helped me every single day to not get so caught in all of these expectations of what our body should look like, what our lives should look like in this illusion, but rather start having that conversation with God today as the spiritual being. And then you'll see life takes on a whole new cover, a whole new color. It's like Sonya said, you get to play. You don't all of a sudden get up in your head and judge yourself so much. You don't have all these expectations around what success needs to look like. Success for you is waking up, right? So I think, is there anything, last words, Sonya, that you and Dr. Zach would like to add?
That was so beautiful. You were talking, I just wanted to cry. I think that's the fundamental thing of getting out of our heads, getting into our hearts, even for that moment of when you first wake up. Cultivate gratitude. 3 things that you're grateful for. Start your day on a positive note. Start your day with a 10-minute, 15-minute. I usually do 45 minutes of meditation. Come back to center. Again, a lot of our perfectionist tendencies have to do with what other people are doing. Put your blinders on. Focus on yourself, your faith, hand on heart. What am I here to do, God? What am I here to do today? Please allow me to serve. It's something that we've talked about in the last, episode that we created. And so again, from a place of service, it's not about you. When we talk about even perfectionism, it's always about us. And when we're talking about being of service, being a servant to the high, it's not about us, it's about everyone else. So in that equation, we're out of it. What do we have to do with it? Other than serve. So yeah, I want to leave it at that. Just really know your why and lead from a place of grace by getting out of your own way.
I love that. Thank you so much for joining us today, Sonya.
Thank you.
And Dr. Zach?
So I'd like to end this session with just a 1 minute breath awareness. So we'll do 1 minute just following our breath. You can count them. Count 1 on the in breath and 2 on the exhale. And if you lose count, just be gentle with yourself. Remember, that's what we talked about today, being compassionate and loving with yourself. So if you lose count, it's great exercise to just learn to go back counting yourself. When you find you've lost concentration, to be gentle with yourself. It's great. It's one of the best exercises there are in learning how to love yourself. So let's start now. Okay.
So nice. Oh my gosh. Any last words, Dr. Zach? That was so, I'm in a state of bliss over here.
Love to all. Love to all.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Zach, and for being with us today. That was wonderful. And I think to wrap us up, what comes up for me is to always focus on what you can do, not what you can't do. I feel like the part of us that feels like we can't do things is not stemming from God. God is focusing on what you can do, hence why he woke you up today. And it's a great reminder. I find meditation specifically, it helps me get in touch with that power. If I'm feeling weak, if I'm scared, if my focus is on my goals, or if my focus is on any of my expectations, I can go to God and I can give it all up and say, guide me, please use me now, because I know I can do things, but I don't know how. And I'm going to trust that you can be my how. And it's just developing that relationship and understanding that we can do so much. Perfectionism, it robs us of our happiness because it has you focusing on what you've either, not done, what you didn't do, or something you messed up with. And it's like what Sonya said, like it's a misstep. It's a mistake. Like you can try again. And I think back to something that I had read, and it was in the gospel around, I think it was in Matthew 14:30, where it talked about Peter walking out to meet Jesus on the water. And Peter was looking at Jesus and he was like, I've got this. I'm good. I can walk on water too. This is great. And then all of a sudden he saw things going on around him, and he saw the storm and he saw the water, and he was getting scared. And he even said, I am sinking. Oh God, oh Lord, save me. And it reminds me, when I take my focus off of God, when I take my focus off of what I can do, and even if I take my focus off for a split second, it's so scary. And you will often find yourself saying, I'm scared. But just know that in a heartbeat, you can shift that focus. And if you've been a perfectionist your entire life, but you don't want to be one anymore, I feel like we can begin again right now by just making different decisions. And it's always up to us. We get to decide what perfection means to us, with that understanding that there is a God out there that is within us and has already told us that we are perfect. And if you need the proof, then just look in the mirror and see that you're breathing. If you need the proof, then get into a meditation and start focusing on your breath, like what Dr. Zach was talking about, because in that moment we feel our spirit. And that's when I think you just start to realize that you're not just this body. You're not just these five senses. You're not just this, robot who's got to do. You're here to play. You're here to explore. You're here to make mistakes and learn and grow. And it's going to look different for everybody, but God loves diversity. And that's why you are as you are. And it's not something to be ashamed of, but to really start to develop that loving kindness for yourself. And that, I think, has been my gift to myself, of just looking at myself with new eyes, with more softer, kinder eyes, and with more gentleness. So thank you both so much for joining. And I will talk to you guys soon then.
Okay. Thanks so much too. Have a great day. Stay well, everybody.